The goal for today is really just to give people a refresher on the different birds that we see in the area. So some of them, of course, are birds that we don't always see. Some of them are birds that we see with more regularity. But what I wanted to do is start by talking about bar charts, which is something that it's just a great tool if you're going to be interested in bird watching. Um, but so we'll go through those, and then I'll also share some of the locations. So I decided instead of just giving the list by bird species, by taxon, where I'm going to go by location. And these are five of the best spots for birding in the winter in El Paso. So Escarate, Rio Bosque, Keystone, Memorial Park, and Franklin Mountains. There's a lot of overlap between the first three, which are wetland sites, and some overlap between the last two for Memorial Park, but we'll sort of trying to keep things not overlapping too much. So trying to just highlight one type of bird for the different areas. Um, okay, so what are bar charts? Bar charts try to tell you what and when for the birds, and that's the big piece that we're looking at here. And so I chose hummingbirds just because this one in particular, sorry, let me see if I can find this pointer. Subtitles. That might be helpful, but not at all what I was anticipating. Anyway, so the black-chin hummingbird is a bird that we all know pretty well. It's our summer hummingbird. They arrive in March, they leave by October more or less, and that's what that line for the bar chart is showing. So the width of the green bar is how common they are. So that little, the little blips at the beginning, sort of as it tapers in, that means that there's only a few of them, and then the numbers increase, and then from April through roughly September, they're pretty abundant, which means just about any place you go, you'll see them. And then they start to trickle out, and then they're gone during the winter. If you compare that to something like the rufous hummingbird, or we can go all the way down to the bottom to the broadtail hummingbird, you can see that they're kind of around through the winter months. They dip down a bit in May, and then the main peak is really in the August, September, which is when we get a lot of our hummingbirds coming through. And then you can see some of the rare things like Rivoles is only shows up occasionally. Costas is a little bit more common, but not much. And one of the things that's really nice about this, if you're starting to get into bird watching and trying to identify what it is, knowing this sort of information can be really helpful because it helps to limit what you're actually looking at. So if you think that you've seen a ruby-throated hummingbird in the spring, odds are pretty good that you're not. Most of our records of them, they're not common in the first place, but the records that we do have tend to be in the fall. Now, all caveats, right? Birds have wings, they show up in weird places. So it doesn't mean that you're not going to see a ruby-throated hummingbird, but it just means that no one's done that before in any of the history. So you have to be pretty careful with some of those sightings. There is now, so that was from the eBird website. The eBird app now has a similar version. So this is through their Explore function, which you can see the little button down at the bottom down here. And it has a bar chart as well, but now it can be broken down by location, a little bit more detailed. So this is Memorial Park, and it's the 51 likely species and how likely you are to see them. So if you go to Memorial Park, you're pretty likely to see a pigeon. They're all over. You're likely to see a collared dove. You're less likely to see an Inca dove. So that's how you can interpret some of those. And of course, when we're thinking about winter, what we're trying to look at is when they're like the timing and when they're here now. I've shown these before in a couple of the talks. This is a really fun way of visualizing some of these interactions and the movement. So this is looking at the black-chin hummingbird movement starting in January. Play that again. And you can see they're mostly into Mexico, and then they migrate north into the Southwest, and then they turn around and head back through the fall and winter. And so those bar charts, if you picture, our dot of El Paso is right here where New Mexico and Texas come together. And so that bar chart that we're looking at is basically a static version of this animation. So they're showing up in March. They're very common throughout the summer and early fall, and then they disappear through the winter. And there's a bunch of these out there from Cornell, so you can definitely check out some of the cool interactives. Now, again, Black-chinned hummingbirds are not here in the winter. So here's one that is. These are the snow geese that Star is going to go take people to see in December. And you can see they're very northern birds. So they breed up in the tundra in Alaska, and then they migrate back through. And then you can just barely see, like, I don't know if you guys can even see my cursor, but that little spot right there, that's the Bosque del Apache population. So most of the snow geese are actually seen more along the Mississippi flyway. Uh, so just kind of a fun way to visualize these. And then one more Southwest species for us. This is brewer sparrow. So this is a winter bird for us, primarily winter birds. So you can see they're pretty common through the Southwest. They migrate north into the upper Rockies for the summer breeding, and then back down into our area for the winter. That's really what we're talking about when we look through these. And so, some of the general types of birds that are more common in the winter for us are a lot of the ducks. So we always talk about how birds fly south for the winter. For a lot of ducks, we're south. We're as far as they go, and they'll stop here, or some will stop. So things like the northern shoveler, it's around year round, but you don't see them as much. They're definitely more common in the winter. Same with gadwall and widgeon and pintail, things like that. And then you can compare that with the Mexican duck, and that's our resident duck. So that's the one that's here year round. And you can see on the bar chart, it's pretty much the same size bars all the way through. Some of the others, again, just to highlight this is looking at woodpeckers primarily. So we have kingfisher, which is not a woodpecker, which is a winter bird for us, the red-naped sapsucker, Lewis's woodpecker. And again, you can see when you look at the Lewis's, none of those bars are very fat. So if they're here, they're going to be here in the winter, but they're not a bird that we see every winter. As opposed to the flicker, which is a winter bird that we pretty much always have coming through. And again, you can compare that with our ladderback woodpecker, which is pretty much always here in pretty good numbers. And the kestrel, which is always here in pretty good numbers. Okay, so jumping into some of the areas. So this is Ascaridae. These are a bunch of widgeon on the golf course. Widgeon are grass grazers, so a lot of times they have a shorter little stubby bill, and they'll come out into the golf course to feed. So pretty interesting. They don't necessarily seem to mind when golfers come through. They'll move out of the way a little bit, but I guess you just have to play through with a lot of them. So some of the birds that we'll see, particularly at Ascaridae. So Ascaridae is nice because it has a big water area, the big lakes and relatively deep lakes. Let Mary mute herself there. Sorry. There we go. Dog issues. So we don't get a ton of snow geese in town. So you saw the pattern. There's lots of them up at Bosque del Apache. There's often some in the reservoirs down on I-10, but there's not a ton of them in town. Ascaridae is one of the areas where we do get them. And along with the snow geese, we also occasionally get Ross's goose, which is in the picture on your right. The small one in the foreground, you can't really tell that well, but it's got a smaller bill and a smaller bird overall. So looks very similar to snow geese, but it's nice actually at Bosque del Apache when there's a lot of them you can scan, and they do stick out a little bit more if you have enough of them next to each other. Some of our diving ducks are the ringneck duck. So these are pretty abundant, really pretty birds. These are all the males. I didn't have or include a picture of the female. Most of the time when you see them, their heads are tucked. So they're sleeping during the day, sort of like the one in the back here. And lesser scaup. These are male and female. So the male is the black one, the drake, and the female's the tan one or brownish one. We occasionally get greater scop. I didn't include a picture of it, but one of the main factors to look at is that black spot on the bill, which is called the nail. For the greater scop, it's wider. The lesser scop, it's narrower. There's also the proportional bill size on greater scop is a little bit larger, and then the peak on the head, the way the feathers are, with greater scop, it's more of a rounded head, and lesser scop, it's a little bit pokey on the back. But it can be tough, especially if they've been diving. A lot of times birds lower the feathers on their head, so it's in general a good identification mark, but it's not always the easiest to tell in the field. And then the nice thing, you can also, if you're seeing these two birds sort of side by side, the ringneck ducks have this spur, the white spur on the shoulder. So they have white going up towards the neck. And then if you compare that with the lesser scop, it doesn't go up. The black sort of ends midway at the body. So that's a trick you can use to see, even if their heads are tucked, you should be able to tell the difference between a ringneck and a lesser scop. Redheads are gorgeous if you hit them in the right light. The drake on the left, bright red head, has a bluish bill, that beautiful orangey yellow eye. The females, the best way to tell them is if they're next to the males. That's usually the way I do it. But these are also diving ducks and usually present in decent numbers at Ascarate. This is why they're called diving ducks. So lucky to see a series there. So they see something underwater and they do this pike and disappear under the water and then pop up someplace else, which can be challenging if you're trying to get pictures of them because you never know where they're going to show up next. And they can move pretty far. They don't always show up right where they went under. Similar to the redheads or canvasback, in the sense that they also have red heads. The canvasback has that really sloped forehead, and the redhead is that rounder head. So slopey back, they're a little, or slopey head, they're a little bit bigger and not quite that bright red. Not as common in our area, but definitely something we see pretty much every year at the lake. Ruddy ducks, they're another diving duck. They might be around through most of the year, but they're definitely more common in winter months. The one on the left is the male. You can see a little bit of the blue tinge. That's their breeding plumage. The one on the right has its head tucked, but the nice thing with ruddy ducks, they're also called stiff tail ducks. And you can see that stiff tail sort of sticking up very pokey into the air. So they always have this, it almost looks like a handle, like a frying pan handle on the back of them. They are diving ducks as well. And they can be in pretty big numbers. They'll be in large rafts at Ascarate. And then the other thing that's worth noting here is that breeding plumage versus non-breeding plumage. Some of the ducks will see them in non-breeding plumage, not in their breeding plumage, which just adds an extra level of challenge to identifying them. And when I first started bird watching in El Paso, 15 years ago, every year I had to relearn the ducks because they're here in the winter. You see them in the winter, and then you go the whole summer without seeing them, and then they show up again, and you've got to remember, which one is the one with the white forehead and the green cheeks, and which one is the dark head with the white cheeks, and so on. So it can be a challenge to relearn our friends every year. Buffleheads, the males are this obvious big white patch on their head, black, almost iridescent forehead and neck. The females are black with a white patch on the cheek, not as distinct as this. Little diving ducks that you can see at the park. These are the widgeons again. So this is the white patch with the green iridescence. They sound like squeaky toys if you ever hear them. It's kind of interesting to hear them when they're in a group. Like I said, they do like to come up on land to graze. So you'll see pretty big numbers, sometimes 100 or more of them at the park. Whenever you're talking about ducks at Ascarate, you have to mention domestic mallards, or I have to mention domestic mallards anyway. These are definitely not winter birds. These are year-round birds for us, but A lot of times the weird ducks that you see are domestics. These actually all look kind of like regular mallards, but there's also the all white ducks or mallards are domestic mallards. There's some that are almost all black. Like there's quite a variety of colors. Largely, these are ones that people have dumped at the park when they learned that having ducks is a giant pain. And the poor guys, they're somewhat doing okay, but you know, that's that responsible pet ownership. If you're going to have ducks, you should take care of them the whole time and not just abandon them at a park. Because they, you know, they need to find their buddies, they need to be able to find food. And a lot of the people that feed ducks at the park are feeding them bread, which is bad for the ducks and causes a condition called angel wing, which I have seen on the ducks out there. So uh, they're very cute. You feel bad for them, but just be aware if you see something weird at the park, it's probably a domestic mallard. Some of the other birds, these are related or close to ducks, but different types. These are mergansers. Some years we have really nice numbers of them. The male is the black with the red bill that's flapping its wings on the left, and then the female is the one with the bedhead, the shaggy head that's on the right. Uh, they're pretty big numbers. They can have large rafts out there. Good sized bird. And then one of my favorites are the hooded mergansers. These were also at Ascaridae. The male with the black and white, and that crest will actually it can lift it all the way up and make the head almost a half circle with that big white patch. And then the female is the brown one with the little bit of a top knot on it. These we don't see every year. They're you know relatively common. Maybe 3 out of 4 years we'll see them, but they're always a treat. Some of the other birds that we have here in winter months are raptors, and one of the ones that we see more at Ascaridae than other places is this gorgeous ferruginous hawk. This is a really large hawk. I think it might be the largest North American hawk. And they are not common. They are maybe every other year at best, maybe even less than that. And they like big open flat spaces. So the lawns, the ball fields and stuff at Ascaridae are a really nice replication of like open grasslands. And so they're a fun one to see. That's definitely one that if you hear somebody say there's a ferruginous hawk out someplace, you should go try to find it because they're really striking. Kingfisher. So kingfisher, another winter bird. They make a nice rattly noise that's pretty cool to see or hear. And they'll be around the park. They're at a few other places, but Ascaridae is a pretty reliable place to see them. Marsh wrens, you're far more likely to hear than you are to see. I've spent, I don't know how many hours trying to actually see the bird that's calling from somewhere in the cattails, no more than 3 feet away, but they're on the other side of the cattails. But they have kind of a buzzy call, and then they've got the black and white stripes on their backs that you can kind of see in the pictures on both sides, and that sets them apart from some of the other birds that are out there. These are also very common at Rio Bosque. There's a lot of them out there, but you'll during winter, if you're walking the trail at Ascaridae, there's usually probably 3 or 4 different ones that have their different patches set up that you'll hear them calling from. Brewer's blackbird is another really pretty bird that's in the winter found at Ascaridae. It also is associated with agricultural fields. So if you're near the Sunland Park racetrack or places like that, you'll see them around. But that really glossy body, the iridescent green back, and the yellow eyes, they do look kind of like grackles, but they're smaller than our great-tailed grackles, and they have non-great tails. They just have regular tails. The females are kind of a slaty gray, so they can be mixed up with that, but you'll see a lot of them at Ascaridae. And then this is what Ascaridae looks like in a good period. So this is, I forget when the picture was from, but just ducks everywhere. So the ones in the middle there, that's a raft of canvasback. Again, you can see kind of the slopey head. There's coots. There's I can see a ringneck duck. Who knows what it is in the background, but a really just fun place to be able to check out and see, hundreds of ducks. And one of the nice things with Scarabée is that because it's a pretty popular location, they aren't quite as flighty as they are in other spots. Like Rio Bosque and Keystone are both also good for duck, but those ducks tend to be a little bit more skittish. And so when you come walking up to them, they all disappear. At Ascaridae, they might kind of drift away from you, but unless you come like running up or doing something crazy, they largely ignore you. So it's a really fun place to be able to learn some of your waterfowl. Just another shot of what it can look like in a good year. These are mostly coots, but also some widgeon, and I don't know if there's anything else mixed into that batch. But this gives you an idea of what it can be like when you're looking at waterfowl. It's these mixed groups, and you just kind of scan and try to pick out the things that look different from everybody else. Okay, so speaking of Rio Bosque, one of the other premier birding spots year round, but especially in the winter months. Um, so again, some of the birds that you'll see there, some of the ones that we just went through will also show up at Rio Bosque. Some of the ones that we were looking at from Ascaridae, they do like deeper water, and so it really depends on the conditions at Rio Bosque whether or not they'll be there. I think we've seen, bufflehead and probably scaup and some of the others. So I think I've seen canvasback out there. So you will see them, but they're not as common because the conditions are just different. It's shallower water. But there's things like these northern pintails, which you really mostly see at Rio Bosque. I almost never see those at Ascaridae or Keystone. And they're a really handsome duck, the males. They have the gray sort of brown head, the bluish bill, the white stripe, and then a long tail going out of the back. And they can also, like I said, they tend to be more skittish. So the photos from Rio Bosque, things tend to be a little bit further away. Cinnamon teal, they're around in the winter months for sure. They do seem to migrate through a little bit more, so they're not as common in the dead of winter, but they're common in fall and spring. Drakes are beautiful, this red color with gold eyes. And then this is the other fun. So this is looking through groups at Rio Bosque. I'll let you all, depending on how large your screen is, I don't know how much you'll be able to see there, but there's probably 4 species visible in this one shot. And that's what it can be like a lot of times. So we have northern shoveler towards the back that have the rusty body and the white on either side. We have gadwall in the middle. There's, I think, a widgeon over here. There were some cinnamon teal off to the side. There's green wing teal along the edges. There's probably Mexican duck in there. So just really, it's fun looking at the picture and doing it. It can definitely be a challenge when you're in the field and you're trying to figure out what they all are, as they're all moving around and swimming, and then they'll all fly off and you have to start over when they land again. Rio Bosque also is great for raptors. These are red-tailed hawks. Red-tailed hawks they have a large variety of different morphs, different color morphs, which can be confusing because especially the one on the right that's all brown, at first glance, you might think it's a Harris's hawk, or it might be, a rough-legged hawk or something else other than a red tail, because when you're looking at red tails, we're usually told to look for belly band. So striping, so they have the dark throat, a white chest, and then striping on the belly. And then they have these dark patches at the front of the wings. And if it's an all dark bird, you can't really see those. So it can definitely be a challenge. And there's some red tails that don't have red tails also to make it fun. But they do have similar body shapes, and some other clues that allow you to pick up on which it actually is. And good days out at the park, you can have 5 to 10 red tails. Harriers, really cool. Rio Bosque, again, is probably the first place that I really saw them in great numbers. They fly pretty low over the ground, staring down. So this picture at the bottom right is a good example of a common pose for them. And then they kind of have what's called like an owl-like disc around their face. So they have some feathers that kind of focus in towards the eye. So like a lot of owls do. And they have, really long tails. A lot of the ones that we see are females. They're the brown morph. Males are gray, and for whatever reason, we don't see them as often around here. Some of the other cool birds, especially if you go in the evenings or early mornings, Rio Bosque is a roost site for thousands of crows and Chihuahuan ravens. Um, I was going through my pictures and realized I did not have anything that comes, well, none of my pictures come close to matching Odd's pictures, but I didn't have anything good for crows, so I was able to borrow a couple from him. So crows they're a little bit smaller bird. They have a different call and they have smaller beaks or smaller bills compared to the ravens. These are the Chihuahuan ravens. They've got that big chunky bill, a little bit larger bird, and then when they're in flight, the ravens have this wedge shape tail, and crows have a fan shape. It doesn't have that same almost triangular shape that you see in the ravens. And both of them, you can see them during the day, but definitely in the evening, they all come back from all the fields that they're at, looking for food, and it's quite a spectacle. I know a lot of times John will do the bird tours or tours at the park in the evenings or late afternoons during the winter to be able to show everybody the awesome experience. Sparrows are another fun group of birds that we get in the winter. White-crowned sparrows are very common in the park. They're a really handsome bird with the black and white striped heads. I don't have a picture of it, but the juveniles can be tricky because juvenile white-crowned sparrows hold that plumage through their first winter, and they have tan and brown stripes instead of black and white stripes. So it can be a little bit tricky to pick up on that initially. Lincoln sparrows, a really sort of subtly pretty, a cute little sparrow. They have gray cheeks, a tan mailer stripe, the mustache stripe here, and then that sort of buffy wash to the breast. They're very secretive, so they like to hang out under plants, especially along the waterways, and they'll pop up briefly and then disappear again. But we definitely one of my favorites. The white crowns will pop up and they'll sit on top of things and they'll all sort of stare at you and wonder what you're doing. And the Lincolns tend to just get out of the way. They tend to hide. One bird that is probably annual, it's there every year, but it can be a little tough to find because there's not a lot of them, and they're even more secretive than Lincoln sparrows or swamp sparrows. They look very similar. They don't have that buffy wash that the Lincoln sparrows have, and they have these rufous wings, so much more rufous on the entire wing. I had my lifer swamp sparrow was at Rio Bosque a few years ago, so I'm always happy to see them because they are tricky to see. Savannah sparrows, they're sort of a larger bird. They're a little bit sleeker sparrow. They have pink bills and pinkish legs. They have fine stripes, so thin stripes on the breast. And in the right lighting, they can have a little bit of yellow in the lower between the bill and the eye, but I don't always see it. It can be a tricky thing to find. And they seem to like drier conditions as well. So these I see more in some of the upland sites of the park. Song sparrows, there's actually quite a few color varieties. Our Southwest one tends to be this lighter gray and brown, almost another rusty brown color. In the same group of sparrows, but a little bit larger, are the towhees. And we'll have green-tailed towhees that have the red cap. The green on the tail is one of those, I don't know if it's chartreuse. It's definitely not a striking green, but the towhees you'll see, or often you'll hear them before you see them because they kick leaf litter around as they look for insects or to uncover seeds. Spotted towhee is another one that we'll see out at the park and around town. Rufous belly, black body, and white spots on the wings. And a lot of the stuff at Rio Bosque, again, just seeing some of the ducks as they're flying around. There's a lot of shovelers in this group, but just a really cool thing to see the big numbers of ducks pick up and fly around and land back down someplace else. All right. I will say, if anybody has questions, feel free to stop throughout. Also, the challenge of Zoom, it's hard to see questions and stuff, but don't hesitate to ask. All right. So Keystone is our third sort of wetland site. That's pretty easy to get to. And in the winter, one of the best things about it are the yellow-headed blackbirds. Got some more pictures of that. You do see northern shovelers pretty commonly there. Really large bill. The one on the right is transitioning into breeding plumage, so you can see the head's a little bit darker, only a little patch of green, so they look a little bit more monstrous. The green is also somewhat iridescent, and so depending on the light, it could appear like they have an all dark head or a green head. In the right light, they're absolutely gorgeous. But that monster bill is a great way to see them, even just in profile. You should be able to pick them out. We do get mallards. So most of the time, our mallard ducks, they are winter. The wild mallards are winter ducks for us. Of course, some of the parks, like Ascarida I mentioned, there are some domestic mallards that are there year round. The males is probably, if most people say, what does a duck look like? They describe a mallard. At least in breeding plumage, the males have those bright iridescent heads, the yellow bills, and the little curly Q feathers at the tail. And then females are sort of a drab version without any of the green colors. You can also see cinnamon teal at Keystone. Probably not quite as common as Rio Bosque, but they are there. And this also just sort of highlights why we all are very happy when you see a cinnamon teal, just a gorgeous bird. Green wing teal. The females are pretty nondescript, but these are small. These are small ducks. The males have the pretty brown head with the green stripe, the sort of off-white tan rump. Females are kind of all brown overall, but you do see a little bit of green in the wing, especially when they're flapping or flying. The green wing teal also like to be up near shores and sort of up in the reeds. So a lot of times you'll see them more on the banks than out in the actual open water. Gadwall, they're one of the ducks that when I first started birding, it's like, oh, it's a nondescript duck. It must be a gadwall, because the male is the one on the left that has the gray body, and the female is the one on the right that has a stripy, more speckled brown body. But in the right light, they are really pretty birds. They're a very subtle, pretty. So I've come around. I feel like that's one of those, like, when you graduate into being an intermediate birder, you start to appreciate gadwall. And like I said, these birds, you'll see them at a lot of these areas. It's more just where I had the better pictures. This is a bufflehead, good numbers at Keystone, and it shows the female. That's the one in the foreground with the black head with just a little white cheek patch. The other great thing with Keystone in the winter are the gulls. Large numbers of gulls will roost here, both in the overnight, and then they'll often come back midday to hang out before leaving again. The most common gull far and away are the ring-billed gulls, which is what most of these are. A couple years ago, we had a pretty good influx of some rare gulls. There was Icelandic gull and California gull, and I think a herring gull. And they're tough to pick out. It's definitely, that's advanced birding. I usually wait for someone to find it and then tell me where it is. It's much easier that way, but really cool numbers, and they do cool behavior. Like they'll pick up food and drop it. They do a lot of bathing, and anytime there's birds in this number, there's always a lot of jostling for position. And it's just a really cool thing to check out. Some of our shorebirds, a lot of shorebirds migrate through spring and fall. Some of our overwintering ones, you might see long-billed dowitchers. Um, so if you see a little football with a really long bill, it's either a dowitcher or a snipe, and snipe look very different than this. Also, ibis. I didn't have a picture that showed the large numbers of ibis, but the keystone is another one of those roosts where you'll see, hundreds of them in the evenings. They like to come in particularly fairly late in the evenings, and then leave early in the morning. So this is really you don't see them during the day that often. And then the blackbirds. So I know a lot of times we'll do field trips again in the evenings to catch the yellow-headed blackbirds when they're returning. Um, Pretty large blackbirds, yellow head, black bodies, white wings, and they do murmurations where they'll fly in sort of tight packs and fly up and down and around. And there can be thousands easily at the park, um, and some of the surrounding areas. It's just another picture of all the sort of glowing yellow heads. It can be a little tough, but to take the pictures just because it's low light at that point and they're fast, and so those are conditions that don't go well together. So I'm always impressed when people like Mary and Starr and John Groves and some of the other great photographers in the group have some just spectacular pictures of these. Kinglets, ruby crown kinglets, little fierce pom pom balls or ping pong balls of energy. They are very active. They're looking for insects along bark. They tend to have this white eye ring, the white patches on the wings. This is a particularly yellow one. They don't always look quite that yellow, and they've got a narrow bill, and you'll see them pretty much everywhere in town in the winter. You'll also probably see yellow-rumped warblers everywhere. There are winter warbler, them and orange crown, so you'll see yellow rump sort of all over. We get the two different races of them. The one on the right is the less common. That's the myrtle, or that's more common on the East Coast. It has a white throat and a black face patch. The one on the left is more than likely an Audubon's. It has the yellow throat and doesn't have the big black patch. We see them primarily in non-breeding plumage, so we have to wait until March or April when they start to migrate to when they molt into their breeding plumage. And their breeding plumage is just spectacular. They're very nondescript this time of year, and then in the spring is wow. Um, and so that is what Keystone looks like. That's sort of a very, in my mind, classical Keystone look where you've got, hundreds of gulls in the foreground and thousands of blackbirds soaring around and the beautiful late afternoon winter light. All right, so moving away from water, although this picture has water, Memorial Park in central El Paso is one of the surprisingly best bird spots in town, especially for passerine, so perching birds. These are red crossbills in the picture, taking a bath in some broken irrigation. Memorial Park often has broken irrigation, so there's puddles and things around. Um, One of our winter hummingbirds. So if you're up near the mountains, you can actually have several species of hummingbirds that'll overwinter. But the most common in the area are these Anna's hummingbirds, and the males have a red throat and a red forehead. Females are a little bit more nondescript, but they have this really weird, it's like a grinding call. It's really hard to sort of describe it as this mechanical grinding. And actually, they winter here in California, so there's some here at my parents' house. So I heard that grinding call today, and you have to remember, like, oh yeah, that's right, Anna's hummingbird. This is a more of a rarity bird. This is a Williamson sapsucker. This is a female, and she was at the park. I think it was 2 years ago now, all winter, and a lot of these trees ended up with these sapsucker wells, and that's what the orangish wells are. That's where they poke through the bark, and then sap wells out, and they drink the sap, and then insects will get caught in there, and they come back and eat the insects. And this one little sapsucker, man, she did quite a number on a lot of the trees. Nothing that damages them completely, but there were lots of sapsucker holes all the way throughout. The males are black and yellow and have red on them, and we do get males occasionally, but this is one of those, every 3 years type of species. Northern flickers, like I said, we see those a lot more often. Um, they're woodpeckers that they tend to forage on the ground a lot more. They look for ants and things, and they'll tear up dirt and sort of flip around through leaf litter looking for insects to eat. The most common one in our area is the red shafted. They have red tail and red on the wing. There's also, on the East Coast, the yellow shafted, which has yellow on the wing and the tail. So this is also a memorial park. This is a Hutton's vireo, and they look a lot like kinglets. It's always a tough challenge to figure them out. They're about the same size. One of the ways to tell them apart, it's a little hard to tell, but that picture on the left, they have a thicker bill and they often have a little hook on it, which is a vireo trait. They have two white wing bars. The kinglet, you don't see the second one as much, and they have black legs, and the kinglets have yellower legs. They also move differently. The kinglets are very hyperactive, and the vireos tend to be a bit slower. This is another vireo that winters with us, Plumbeus vireo. Plumbeus means gray, lead colored, and they are, this really nice lead color. Again, they're kind of slow. They're like a slow warbler, heavier bills, and they're good at picking bugs off. It's tough to see, but the bird on the left is actually eating an insect of some sort. There are kinglets at the park, so you definitely have to compare. Again, it's tough not seeing them side by side, but it's a narrower bill. You don't see that second white wing bar. The legs are a little bit more yellowish than the Hutton's vireo. And the kinglets are very common. Hutton's vireos are very uncommon in El Paso. Red-breasted nuthatch is another nice winter bird for us. Trying to think, we occasionally do get white-breasted, but red-breasted is the more common of the nuthatches. Surprisingly small, this reddish red belly, and then the black and white striped head. This is awesome camouflage. I included this primarily. This isn't a common bird in the winter. It is a winter bird when it shows up. Brown creepers are masters of camouflage. They creep up the bark. They've got those little thin bills that they use to pry for insects. And this one was at Memorial Park for probably a month this past winter. Townsend solitaire. This is a member of the thrush family, like bluebirds and robins. A couple years ago, we had a really nice influx of them. These are primarily mountain birds, along with the red-breasted nuthatch, actually. And we don't see them every year, but a couple years ago, for whatever reason, we had this big influx of mountain species, and so there were Townsend solitaires all over the place. Robins. So it's funny. I think the song. We always think of the robin being a sign of spring. El Paso, it's a sign of winter. We do. There are some around year round, but definitely the big numbers of them are in winter months. And there will be groups of hundreds of them that come through and can pick off a lot of food. This is on one of the palm trees, and the fruits on the palm at Memorial. Hermit thrush is in the same thrush family. They're probably more common fall and spring, but they do tend to, the few will overwinter. Songbirds are actually more on the ground, so a picture of one in the tree is a little unusual. But speckly breast, that's one of the best ways to identify them, and they run on the ground more. And then cedar waxwings, which are gorgeous. They're, again, not a every year bird, but we do see them, every other year, 2 out of 3 years, something like that. They're fruit eaters largely, and so they'll go to the trees. Like there were actually some in the background of that robin picture eating palm fruit and buds and things like that. Crossbills, they have that really cool bill that they used for getting seeds out of conifers primarily. And so it's got that little cross that they use like tweezers to pull out the branches or pull out the seeds. A few years ago, there were good numbers of them around Memorial Park. I think they're around most years. Because they like conifers, you tend to find them more along the mountains, although there have been decent numbers in the upper valley at least. Juncos, so this is a good winter bird for us. Another sign of winter is when the juncos arrive. There's several different races of them, different color morphs that we get in town. And they also have white tail feathers so that you can tell what they are when they fly. And again, more yellow rump warblers. I feel like yellow rump warblers are everywhere, so you should look for them everywhere you go. All right, and the last area is sort of more of a general area. It's the mountains, so Coronado, Franklin Mountains, etc. Some of the woodpeckers, red-naped sapsucker, really nice bird with the red head and the red throat. Lewis's woodpecker, not a every year bird, really great when you see them. They're pink. They have a dark sort of metallic green back. Scrub jays, Woodhouse's scrub jay is our species. You'll see them in Arroyo Park, up near the country club, pretty much anywhere towards the mountains. If it's a big year for them, they'll start to move down lower towards UTEP and into the valleys, but not as common. Red-breasted nuthatch, again, can be pretty common up in the area. Townsend solitaire in good years. Cedar waxwings again, and they like to travel in flocks. So you can see the ones on that juniper on the left. There's, I don't know, maybe a dozen just in that one shot. Some of the other sparrows that we see during the winter are white-throated sparrow. This isn't a super common bird for us. A couple each year come through. They have most of them have that really nice white throat and tend to have yellow around the lores. And then just a few other good birding spots in the winter and other times of year. So along the river, Rio Grande River Park can be nice. There's a few other spots. Basically, any place you can get near the river in the Upper Valley is good. Those are some pictures before from Coronado Country Club, El Paso Country Club, and those neighborhoods have really nice trees, so you can get some really good birds there. Waco tanks can be good, although it has not been as good of late because of the drought and the aoudad. The Barbary sheep have really done bad stuff to the environment out there. The Fred Hervey wastewater treatment plant, the asterisk there is because the legality is somewhat questionable. There's signs that say no trespassing, but no one has ever bothered anybody, and we've had permission. Audubon has had permission for Audubon field trips. I don't know about individuals, but I've gone numerous times and there's never any problems. But that's a good spot for sparrows, hawks, and water birds. The horizon reverse osmosis ponds are deep water, so there's some of the diving ducks are out there. I added the archaeology museum trail because I don't know how many people know, but we have a super rarity in El Paso right now called the nutting flycatcher, and of course this happened while I'm here in California. So I'm hoping it sticks around a week, but somebody found it 2 days ago, I want to say, and it's I believe it's definitely the first El Paso County record, and I think the fourth in Texas, and it's a Mexican species that rarely comes up to north of the border, so it's always an exciting thing to see. So you should definitely check that out. And then if anyone has any other favorite spots, feel free to unmute and share them, or any birds that they think of as winter birds and I didn't mention. Said it's already an hour of looking at pictures of birds, and so I didn't want to go too much longer. But
Kevin, I saw a blue grosbeak the other day. Is that just a late migrant, or can that be a winter?
Must be. There's some birds that should migrate through that'll stick around. I know Jim Payton in the Upper Valley, he's had a male rufous hummingbird that spent all winter with him the last 2 years. So it's certainly possible that it could be hanging around for the whole year, or it's just late.
Yeah.
But that's a good sighting. That's not.
Yeah, it was on Blanchard in the rim area, just in a yard.
Wow.
Yeah, really pretty.
A male?
Yeah, it was a male.
Wow. Cool.
Now, looking at the bar graphs on our local checklist, the latest dates shown for blue grosbeak are about the last week in October.
Wow. Well, I wrote down the day I saw it. It was sometime like no more than 2 or 3 days ago. And I got a really good look at it. It was with some juncos.
Excellent.
Send me an email, Susie, with your best guess on the date.
I will. No, I wrote it down, so I know what day it is. I'll send it to you.
Thank you.
Okay.
Kevin, I have
Yeah.
a question about the cormorants that come through. I've been seeing large numbers of them right now. Do they migrate in the winter? Do they hang out here a lot or what?
So we do have cormorants year round, neotropic particularly, but I do believe that we get more of them in the winter. And then double crested, which is the other species, neotropic's a little bit smaller, double crested a little larger and not as common. And I feel like I see more of those in winter months. But if you look at the bar charts, they're sort of here spottily year round.
Okay.
But yeah, it does seem like you see them more in winter.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's a factor of more water in places in the winter, but
Yeah, I'm not sure.
Are there still cardinals down at Rio Bosque?
Haven't seen one in probably over a month.
Okay.
Not to say that they aren't there, but hard to find right now.
Okay.
and I know there's a male at Keystone that's been there for a while, but I don't know again if people have seen it lately. But some of them, the challenge when there's one bird in an entire park, you can go a while without seeing it.
Yeah, that's true. Well, thank you, Kevin. This was great.
Yeah,
Inspired
you're welcome.
me.
Yeah, it was very cool.
Inspired me to get out there, go more
I
places.
know there's so many good spots, right? Definitely worth getting out and doing some exploring. And I think we tend to always think of spring and fall as the best times to bird, but there are really good birds in the winter for us. And typically, I think when we do Christmas bird counts, which we usually do right around New Year's Day, we'll end up with 100 species just in the central El Paso area. That doesn't even include Rio Bosque. So there's a lot of good birds in the winter.
I was gonna say that Western bluebirds are back.
Oh yeah, I forgot to include them. Yeah.
Yeah.
Where are they?
I see them a lot out at Anthony Country Club because that's where we play golf. So I'm
Okay.
a lot, and they come back every winter.
Well, I used to
Yeah.
see them when I was hiking in the Franklins, but I don't do that anymore. So
There have been pretty good reports of them throughout town. I know people have been seeing them in the Franklins, along the valley. Obviously, Mary's seeing them up in Anthony. So seems like it might be a good year for bluebirds.
Okay.
That'd be exciting.
They last winter, I had John come out with me, and there was about 6 eastern bluebirds mixed in with a large group of westerns. So
Awesome.
yeah, that was pretty cool. I'm hoping maybe that'll happen again this year.
Yeah,
Well-
a few years ago when we had a really good winter birding, there was one field in the valley that had all 3 species. It had western,
wow.
eastern, and mountain bluebirds.
Wow.
Oh wow.
Yeah,
wow.
and vermilion flycatcher, like all sorts of cool stuff.
Oh my God.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, I don't know how many, maybe 2-3 years ago, we had oh gosh, the one that's so pretty that you showed that just flew out of my head, that has kind of the mask.
Cedar waxwing.
Cedar waxwings. We had them here in the rim area for about a week or 2.
Yeah.
And then they
They're
moved
very
on.
they're very nomadic. Yeah. I just
Yeah.
saw a bunch of them here in Sacramento, and same thing. People are like, oh yeah, they're only here for a few days. They, come in and eat everything and then move
I
to the
know.
next batch.
I love
That
them.
same year probably that you're talking about, Susie, I was at UTEP on I think a Sunday, and there were probably like 150 or 200 of them in the trees around the library.
Wow.
It was
Wow.
spectacular.
They're so beautiful. They're so pretty. Well, okay.
All right. Well, you all need to go to sleep and get some rest so you can hit the spots, hit the parks tomorrow. Go see some birds.
Yeah,
Well, I have the cowboy game on in the background, but it's terrible. So
Uh,
as usual.
Thank you so much, Kevin.
Thank you.
yeah. Yeah. You're welcome.
All
And
right.
remember to
thank you
share.
very much.
Share.
That was awesome.
Bye-bye.
Yeah. Email pictures for next month's meeting.
Bye.
Okay.
Thank
Bye,
you.
everybody.
Thank you, Kevin.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye bye.